When people imagine early America, they often picture a vast, silent wilderness, empty forests, endless plains, untouched rivers waiting patiently to be discovered. This image has been repeated so often in movies, textbooks, and popular stories that it feels natural to accept it as truth. But this idea couldn't be more wrong. In reality, long before any European ship appeared on the horizon, North America was already a living, breathing world shaped by human hands, minds, and traditions. Thousands of years before Europeans arrived, North America was home to millions of native people, organized into complex, intelligent, and deeply connected societies. These were not small, scattered groups simply surviving day by day. They were nations with systems of governance, trade networks stretching across vast distances, and cultural traditions refined over generations. The land was not empty, it was carefully inhabited, understood, and respected. Forests were not wild chaos. Native communities knew exactly which trees to protect, which to harvest, and when to let areas rest. They used controlled burns to prevent massive wildfires, enrich the soil, and encourage new plant growth. Plains were not unused grasslands. They were hunting grounds managed to ensure that buffalo herds thrived year after year. Rivers were not just water sources, but lifelines, routes for travel, centers of trade, and sacred spaces filled with spiritual meaning. Deserts, often thought of as harsh and unlivable, were mastered through generations of observation and adaptation. Native peoples learned how to collect rainwater, grow crops in dry soil, and travel long distances under extreme heat. Mountains were not barriers but sources of protection, food, and spiritual guidance. Every environment, forests, plains, deserts, rivers, and mountains, was deeply understood and carefully managed through knowledge, passed down over centuries. These people didn't just live on the land, they lived with it. The land was not property to be owned, bought, or sold. It was a living presence, a relative that provided shelter, food, and identity. Taking more than necessary was seen as disrespectful, not just to nature but to future generations. This philosophy shaped every part of daily life. Villages were often built near rivers, not by accident, but by careful planning. Rivers provided fresh water, fertile soil for farming, and natural trade routes. Crops such as corn, beans, and squash, often called the Three Sisters, were grown together because they supported one another. Corn provided structure, beans added nutrients to the soil, and squash protected the ground from weeds and moisture loss. This was sustainable agriculture long before the term existed. Seasonal migration played a key role in maintaining balance with nature. Many tribes moved with the seasons, following animal herds, harvesting crops at the right time, and allowing the land to recover. This movement was not random. It followed established patterns learned through observation of weather, animal behavior, and plant cycles. By moving instead of exhausting one area, native societies ensured long-term survival for both people and the environment. Food was not treated as a commodity, it was a shared blessing. Hunting and farming were often community efforts, and the results were distributed according to need. Elders, children, and the sick were cared for first. Hoarding food while others went hungry was considered dishonorable. Through this system, survival was collective, not individual. Knowledge was passed down orally through stories, songs, and rituals. These stories were not just entertainment, they were libraries of wisdom. They taught young people how the world worked, where they came from, and how they should live. Stories explained natural events, preserved history, and reinforced moral values. Elders were respected not for wealth or power, but for wisdom and experience. Every generation learned to respect the earth from an early age. Children were taught how to track animals without disturbing them, how to harvest plants without killing them, and how to thank nature for what it provided. Gratitude was a daily practice, not an occasional thought. Before a hunt, prayers were offered. After a harvest, ceremonies were held. This created a deep emotional bond between people and their environment. Nature wasn't something to conquer, it was family. Animals were often seen as teachers, each with lessons to offer. The eagle represented vision and strength. The wolf symbolized loyalty and teamwork, and the bear embodied courage and healing. These beliefs shaped how people interacted with the natural world, encouraging harmony rather than domination. From the Arctic tundra to the tropical south, native cultures adapted brilliantly to their environments. In the far north, Inuit communities developed tools, clothing, and shelters designed to survive extreme cold. Kayaks, igloos, and insulated clothing made from animal skins were engineering marvels perfectly suited to icy conditions. In the eastern woodlands, tribes built longhouses and cultivated fertile lands surrounded by dense forests. In the Great Plains, communities followed massive buffalo herds, using every part of the animal meat for food, hides for clothing and shelter, bones for tools. Nothing was wasted. In the southwest, stone villages and cliff dwellings protected inhabitants from heat and enemies, while advanced irrigation systems supported farming in dry climates. Far to the south, in warmer regions, native peoples adapted to lush forests and coastal environments, becoming skilled fishermen, canoe builders, and traders. Each region produced unique cultures, languages, art styles, and belief systems. There was no single native identity. There were hundreds of civilizations, each shaped by its environment and history. Together, they formed a diverse and interconnected world long before the word America existed. Trade routes connected distant tribes, allowing the exchange of goods like copper, shells, tools, and food as well as ideas, stories, and technologies. News traveled across the continent long before written language or modern transportation. Understanding this truth changes everything. Early America was not an empty stage waiting for history to begin. History was already happening, rich, complex, and deeply human. The land had caretakers, cultures, and civilizations that thrived for thousands of years. The idea of an undiscovered America ignores the lives, wisdom, and achievements of those who are already here. And when we look closer, we realize something powerful. These early societies had already learned lessons about balance, sustainability, and community that the modern world is still struggling to understand. Long before maps drew borders and names, this land was already full of life, meaning, and memory, a world not waiting to be discovered, but waiting to be remembered. Many people still believe that Native Americans lived simple, undeveloped lives, surviving with only basic tools and limited knowledge. This belief, repeated 4 generations, hides a far more impressive truth. Long before European contact, native civilizations across North America built cities, designed complex political systems, mastered engineering and astronomy, and created trade networks that stretched thousands of miles. These societies were not behind the rest of the world. They were advanced in ways uniquely suited to their environment, values, and understanding of life. One of the most remarkable examples of early native civilization was the Mississippian civilization, which flourished between roughly 800 and 1600 CE, centered around present-day Illinois. This civilization transformed the landscape through massive earthworks that still amaze archaeologists today. The most famous site, Cahokia, was not just a settlement, it was a true city. At its peak, Cahokia was home to more than 20,000 people, making it larger than many European cities of the same era. The most striking features of Cahokia were its enormous earthen mounds, built entirely by hand, using baskets of soil carried by thousands of workers. Some of these mounds rose higher than the Great Pyramid of Gizeh's base area. Monk's Mound, the largest, stood over 100 feet tall and covered more ground than the pyramids of Egypt. These mounds were not random piles of dirt. They served ceremonial, political, and religious purposes. At the top of Monk's Mound stood a large wooden structure, likely the home or temple of a powerful leader. Cahokia was carefully planned. Streets were aligned with the movement of the sun, revealing deep astronomical knowledge. Woodhenge, a large circle of wooden posts near the city, functioned as a solar calendar, marking solstices and equinoxes. This allowed the people of Cahokia to organize agriculture, ceremonies, and seasonal activities with precision. The city also had clearly defined neighborhoods, plazas for public gatherings, and areas dedicated to trade and worship. Trade was central to Mississippian life. Artifacts found at Cahokia include copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf of Mexico, and stone tools from distant regions. This proves that Cahokia was part of a vast trade network connecting much of North America. Ideas, beliefs, and technologies traveled along these routes, strengthening cultural connections across the continent. Far to the southwest, another incredible civilization was rising, the ancestral Pueblones, also known as the living in what is now Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. They created some of the most sophisticated stone architecture in ancient North America. Their cliff dwellings, such as those at Mesa Verde, were built high into canyon walls, offering protection from enemies and harsh weather. These stone cities were engineering marvels. Constructed without metal tools or wheels, they featured multi-story buildings, well-designed living spaces, and intricate stonemasonry that has survived for centuries. The placement of windows, doorways, and structures was not accidental. Many buildings were aligned with the sun, allowing light to enter specific rooms during solstices. This shows a strong understanding of astronomy and its importance in daily life. The ancestral Pueblones also developed advanced agricultural systems in a harsh, dry environment. They built irrigation channels, terraced fields, and water reservoirs to capture rainwater and support crops like corn, beans, and squash. Their ability to thrive in such conditions demonstrates deep environmental knowledge and careful planning. Equally impressive was their social organization. These communities were tightly connected through shared rituals, trade, and cultural traditions. Ceremonial spaces called kivas were used for religious gatherings, decision-making, and community bonding. Life was organized around cooperation, spiritual balance, and respect for the natural world. In the northeastern woodlands, the Iroquois Confederacy, also known as the Haudenosaunee, developed one of the most advanced political systems in the pre-colonial world. This confederacy united several nations, including the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca, under a single governing structure. Later, the Tuscarora joined, forming the Six Nations. What made the Iroquois Confederacy truly revolutionary was its emphasis on democracy, unity, and shared leadership. Decisions were made through councils where leaders debated issues until consensus was reached. This system valued balance, fairness, and the well-being of future generations. Leaders were chosen based on wisdom and character, not wealth or force. And women played a significant role in selecting and advising leaders. The Great Law of Peace, the foundation of the Iroquois political system, emphasized justice, equality, and collective responsibility. Many historians believe that this model influenced the ideas of early American thinkers. Concepts such as federalism, checks and balances, and representative governance can be traced back to the Iroquois Confederacy's structure. In this way, Native political thought helped shape what would later become modern democracy. What connects to all these civilizations is the fact that they were not isolated. Native societies across North America were linked through vast networks of trade and communication. Copper from the Great Lakes reached the southeast. Shells from the Atlantic and Gulf coasts appeared in inland communities. Obsidian, turquoise, food crops, tools, and ceremonial objects moved across great distances. But trade was about more than objects. It was about ideas, agricultural techniques, spiritual beliefs, artistic styles, and political concepts spread along these routes. This exchange created a continent-wide web of knowledge and culture long before modern transportation or written records. These achievements challenged the outdated idea that Native Americans lived simple or primitive lives. Instead, they reveal a world of innovation, intelligence, and adaptability. These civilizations built cities without polluting the land, governed without tyranny, and lived with a deep understanding of nature's rhythms. Long before European contact, North America was already home to societies that understood balance, sustainability, and community. Their accomplishments stand as powerful evidence that early American history did not begin with colonization. It began thousands of years earlier, shaped by civilizations whose legacy still deserves recognition today. The first Americans were scientists long before the word science was ever spoken. Their laboratories were forests, rivers, fields, and skies. Their experiments were carried out over generations, refined through careful observation, experience, and wisdom passed from elders to youth. Long before microscopes, textbooks, or written formulas, Native peoples developed systems of knowledge that allowed them to thrive across some of the most diverse landscapes on Earth. One of their greatest achievements was agriculture. Native Americans were master farmers who understood the land in ways that modern agriculture is only beginning to rediscover. They domesticated and cultivated crops that would eventually feed much of the world. Corn, beans, squash, potatoes, tomatoes, cacao, peppers, and countless other foods all originated from native knowledge. The famous farming method known as the Three Sisters corn, beans, and squash perfectly demonstrates native scientific thinking. Corn provided a natural pole for beans to climb. Beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, enriching it naturally. Squash spread across the ground, blocking weeds and retaining moisture. Together, these plants created a self-sustaining system that protected soil health, increased yields, and reduced the need for artificial fertilizers. This was sustainable agriculture at its finest, designed not for short-term gain but for long-term balance. Water management was equally advanced. In dry regions, native communities built irrigation canals, terraces, and reservoirs to capture and direct rainwater. In wetter areas, they managed floods by planting crops strategically and maintaining natural wetlands. Soil was protected through crop rotation, controlled burning, and careful harvesting. These practices ensured that the land remained fertile for future generations. Concept deeply rooted in native values. Healing and medicine formed another powerful area of native science. They identified thousands of medicinal plants and understood how to prepare them into teas, salves, powders, and tinctures. Willow bark, for example, was used to reduce pain and fever long before modern science isolated its active ingredient, which later became aspirin. Native healers also practiced surgical techniques, including wound treatment, bone setting, and even basic forms of surgery. They understood infection prevention through plant-based antiseptics and hygiene practices. But healing was never just physical. Mental and emotional wellness were considered equally important. Trauma, grief, anxiety, and fear were addressed through counseling, ceremony, and community support. Healing was holistic, treating the whole person, not just the symptoms. Many modern medicines trace their origins directly back to native plant knowledge. Yet for centuries, this wisdom was dismissed or taken without credit. Today, scientists are once again turning to indigenous knowledge systems to find sustainable and effective solutions for health and environmental challenges. But for the first Americans, science and spirituality were never separate fields. Observation of nature was also a spiritual act. Studying the stars, animals, rivers, and wind was a way to understand both the physical world and the deeper forces shaping existence. Knowledge was not just about control, it was about connection. The night sky held special importance. Native astronomers tracked the movement of stars, planets, and the moon with incredible accuracy. Star patterns guided planting seasons, hunting times, navigation, and ceremonies. Many constellations carried stories that explained creation, human behavior, and moral values. These stories were teaching tools, ensuring that scientific knowledge was remembered and passed down. Animals were observed with deep respect. Their behaviors taught lessons about survival, cooperation, patience, and strength. Hunters studied migration patterns, breeding cycles, and animal psychology to ensure successful hunts without endangering species. Every hunt was surrounded by rituals of gratitude, acknowledging the life taken and reinforcing respect for balance. Their flow taught lessons about time, patience, and renewal. Wind carried messages, seasons, and change. Mountains were places of vision and reflection. Nothing in nature was considered random or meaningless. Everything had a role in the great balance of the universe. Stories played a central role in preserving this knowledge. They explained how the world was created, why natural events occurred, and how humans should live. These stories were not myths in the sense of fantasy. They were symbolic records of observation, history, and ethics. Through storytelling, complex ideas were made understandable, memorable, and meaningful. Ceremonies marked important moments in life and nature. Seasonal ceremonies celebrated planting and harvest cycles. Birth ceremonies welcomed new life into the community. Death rituals honored ancestors and reaffirmed the continuity of existence. Victory dances celebrated survival and success, not domination. Every ceremony reinforced the idea that life was interconnected. Music and movement were essential parts of this spiritual science. Drums represented the heartbeat of the earth. Songs carried prayers, history, and healing energy. Dances were not performances but expressions of unity between humans, nature, and the spirit world. At the core of all this knowledge was balance between people and nature. Balance between physical needs and spiritual growth. Balance between taking and giving. Decisions were often made with the future in mind, sometimes 7 generations ahead. This long-term thinking ensured survival not just for individuals, but for entire cultures and ecosystems. Life, for the first Americans, was guided by this balance between the seen and unseen forces of the universe. Science was not about dominance, it was about understanding. Spirituality was not about escape, it was about responsibility. Together, they formed a complete system of knowledge that allowed native civilizations to flourish for thousands of years. Today, as the modern world faces environmental crises, health challenges, and social imbalance, the wisdom of the first Americans feels more relevant than ever. Their scientific and spiritual knowledge reminds us that progress does not have to come at the cost of harmony and that true intelligence lies in living in balance with the world around us. North America was never a single story or a single culture. But an entire world of diversity. These animals provided nearly everything: food, clothing, shelter, tools, and even spiritual meaning. When horses were introduced to the continent, Plains tribes quickly adapted, becoming some of the most skilled horse riders in human history. Warfare was not about conquest, but about protection, reputation, and survival. In the southwest deserts, tribes such as the Navajo and Apache thrived in environments many would consider unlivable. Extreme heat, limited water, and rugged terrain demanded strength and adaptability. The Apache were highly mobile, using the land itself as a defense system. They knew every canyon, trail, and water source, allowing them to move quickly and avoid danger. The Navajo, on the other hand, developed a rich culture centered on herding, farming, and craftsmanship. This led to newspapers, books, and official documents, strengthening cultural identity and political organization. Governance among southeastern tribes included councils, laws, and systems of justice, reflecting sophisticated political thinking. One of the most iconic features of Pacific Northwest culture was the totem pole. Each figure carved into a totem held deep meaning, passed down through generations. Antarctic Inuit communities survived extreme cold through innovative clothing, tools, and shelters. Governance systems ranged from councils to confederacies, all designed to maintain balance and cooperation. This diversity proves a powerful truth. North America was never a cultural blank space. It was a continent filled with innovation, creativity, and wisdom. When colonization began, it did not arrive as a simple meeting of worlds. It came like a storm. Thriving civilizations that had existed for thousands of years suddenly faced unimaginable war, forced removal, broken treaties, and deliberate cultural erasure. Understanding the first Americans changes how we see history itself. It forces us to question the idea of discovery. America was not discovered, it was already known, named, and lived in. What Europeans encountered was not an empty land, but a continent shaped by survival, knowledge, and deep relationship with nature. Colonization did not create America, it interrupted it. Their governance models influence democratic thinking. Their environmental practices offer lessons in sustainability that modern societies urgently need. Even now, scientists and policymakers are turning to indigenous knowledge to understand how to live more responsibly on the planet. And perhaps the greatest secret of early America is not hidden in ruins or artifacts, but in values. Before conquest, before borders, before empires, this land already knew how to live in harmony. Harmony between people and nature. Harmony between generations. Harmony between the physical and spiritual worlds. The first Americans understood that land is not owned, it is cared for. That progress does not require destruction. That wealth is meaningless without community. These ideas challenge modern assumptions and invite us to rethink what true advancement really looks like. Remembering this history is not about guilt, it is about truth. It is about honoring lives that were lived, wisdom that was earned, and cultures that refused to vanish. When we listen to native voices today, we are not hearing echoes of the past, we are hearing living nations, still shaping the future. The story of America does not begin with colonization. It begins much earlier, in a land already rich with meaning. And when we finally recognize that history becomes not just a record of conquest, but a testament to survival, resilience, and the enduring power of harmony.